From arguing with a member of the queer community,
shame to the queer
You know
community.
what? I tell you who's really embarrassing.
the finishing of Stop Oil activist, and then explaining immigration problems. Here are times Douglas Murray left his opponents speechless. Starting off with this interview where this activist tried to humiliate Douglas, but ended up embarrassing himself.
You're embarrassing yourself. That's probably why people wouldn't
I don't
want to come
think
to
so.
your
I think
show.
you're embarrassing yourself.
Gentlemen,
you're a shame to the queer
You know
community.
what? I tell you who's really embarrassing.
I'm not a member of the queer community, you stupid sod.
I tell you,
I'm not a member of the queer community.
The person
what are you
who
talking
ultimately
about,
is
the queer
genuinely
community?
embarrassing him.
I hope this guy is being sarcastic.
But the entire thing, the LGBT+, the fact that there's more and more people who are coming under this particular
No,
ban.
it's not a real thing. It's bullshit. It's total horseshit. And I'm just one of the things that's very annoying in this era is that there are just these steaming piles of horseshit in front of us all. and we're all meant to sort of shovel our way through them. I just don't have time. And I might pay somebody else to shovel the horse shit for me. But I just don't have time for this crap. I don't have time for people who keep adding letters to... my view has always been there's no such thing as anyway. And that's just... Don't get on famously, have very little in common.
But why is the state and the police tolerating it in the way that we seem to be?
Well, I'd go slightly further than you peers. I mean, they are a sort of end-time apocalyptic cultist movement of a kind that Londoners and others have seen throughout history. People who go gibbering through the streets screaming about the imminence of the apocalypse. And I don't have much time for their views. And I think that their method of protest increasingly, of course, means that...
How can blocking streets will help the Stop Oil movement? You are blocking people from the same income class as you. You are closer from the people you are blocking in the streets than the politicians who are promoting those kind of movements, and they don't even respect that.
More and more members of the public don't have much time for their views. Freedom of speech, of course everyone defends it. Freedom of protest, everyone defends it. But you do not have a right. I have strong views on a whole range of things. I don't have the right to go and sit in the middle of the M24 and tell everyone else to go, hang whilst I decide to tell them how they should go about their day or ruin their day. I'd be hauled off the motorway in a moment, and quite rightly so. The freedom to protest doesn't extend to disrupting the lives of everyday people trying to go about their business.
I'm fed up with these fringe idiot cases. I mean, they're so mentally defective, these people, and incredibly narcissistic, I can be queer and also celebrate Palestine. No, you fucking can't. Fuck off.
It's true, I don't think they would accept your support, knowing you are a queer and fully knowing it is a Muslim country that don't accept those kind of behavior.
I can both argue for a two-state solution and also celebrate queerness and also not let myself down. No, you can't. No, you can't. You can't do all those things. At some point, you've got to choose.
Here, Douglas is talking about the immigration problem and has many good arguments about those who are for immigration and those who are against.
People dream that you could live in a borderless world on one hand. Other people pretend you could just stop anyone coming. These are impossible dreams, but somewhere in the middle of them is something we need to aim for. And one of the ways I've started to realize that we need to think about this is in the following terms, not about right or wrong or, good and bad. I'm a good person, you're a Nazi. It's too easy. What we need to think about with this is that we're in a situation with migration talking about competing virtues. There are two virtues in this whole debate that are in serious competition, not just between people, but within all of us. The first virtue, I would say, is the virtue of mercy, the desire to be merciful to our fellow human beings who are suffering. And we all feel that. Everybody should feel that. But there is also another virtue here, the virtue of justice. And that's not just justice for people fleeing countries, but justice for people in the countries that they are fleeing to. We can't ignore those two parts. We need to recognize that's what's going on here. This is why it's so difficult, and the debate goes down the middle of all of us. So look, there are so many questions we need to think about if we're going to address this. And I'm so glad, by the way, this isn't a debate, because this is a very not debatable issue. But why we need to think about this. Let me give you just 6 examples of things we need to think about much more deeply than we have. The first is this. I would suggest it is very obvious that the developing world cannot move to the developed world. So what do we do? Who can come? That's one part of that question. And the second part, which is much harder, who can't? We are very, very bad at having even a bit of that debate, but we need to. Secondly, what are the differences between people fleeing for their lives from a war zone and people fleeing serious, severe economic deprivation in, for instance, sub-Saharan Africa? Now, there are differences, but if you recognize that, then you've got to work out where along the way you would put your line for legitimate asylum claims. A third of people in sub-Saharan Africa polled last year by Gallup said they wanted to move and leave sub-Saharan Africa. So you've got to work out along this way, if you're going to have a sustainable asylum policy, who qualifies for it. And I would suggest we're not very good at having that discussion either. A third point. We know that some cultures find it easier to mix into other cultures than others, but we don't know exactly how. And we don't know what the proportions of people are in another culture that work well, integrate well, adapt well, and what the proportions are that start to make that integration, that adaptation far harder. We have thought very little about this, and what thinking there has been pretty bad. Let me give you another example of something we need to think about. How do we deal with a question this serious in the age of social media? An age when a single photograph of a single person can go all around the world, and everybody sees it, and everybody says something must be done. And their politicians think, I've got to do something. And then they do something, and the public say, no, that wasn't the something we were thinking of. We've thought of something else, but we don't know what. How do we live in that world? How do politicians act in that world? How do we have any form of political leadership in that world? How do we work out what the right thing to do is in that world? Not just in the short term, but in the long term too.
Please comment below what you think about Douglas' arguments. Also, don't forget to subscribe. It helps me a lot.
Britain's a racist country. Usually, by the way, an ethnic minority British person who claims that Britain is racist, yet weirdly is still in it. And then this week, I think the paper hit what is just a new low even for it. Within hours of the news of the death of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II, the newspaper decided to immediately run an incredibly hostile piece by a left-wing non-entity academic talking about colonialism, empire, and the crimes of colonialism, and that Elizabeth II had much to answer for, and this sort of thing. They didn't even leave it 24 hours before doing this. And we've seen in the days since other left-wing media join in. CNN, MSNBC, they've all decided to display not just animus against the Crown and against Great Britain and the Commonwealth. They've also
doing a hit piece about Britain just after the Queen's dead. It's a very low grab views method and shouldn't be supported.
They decided to display their extraordinary ignorance of history. If the British Empire had been genocidal, the people in question wouldn't be
very stupid results of a very stupid ideology being rolled out by very stupid people. Basically, everything has come unstuck in recent years by the ever-expanding alphabet acronym people, where the fight for gay rights and minority sexual rights turned into this demand, this claim that there was no such thing as biological sex. As Peter Tatchell and others well know, the argument for gay rights was won by saying, we're just like the rest of you. It was also won by saying, you know, we just want to live and let live. Yet the gender ideologues have done something totally different. They've said, you don't have the right to have your own say in this. We are right, and you have to agree with us. They say, we're here, and instead of saying we're here, we're queer, and just get used to it, it's we're here, and as a result, biological reality doesn't exist. Well, clearly, this very, very idiotic ideology is causing havoc. Just today, Piers, there's another tape from a school in Scotland where some poor boy is having to explain to his teacher that there's only two biological sexes and that the gender woo-woo stuff is nonsense. And yet again, it's the student having to educate the teacher because the teacher has been indoctrinated into stupidity.
I can agree with Douglas. Before it was just a biological problem. Then everybody accepted it. Most people didn't even care. But now it is a gender problem, and most of them don't even know what's the problem. So we keep talking about it. But we can't fix the problem because they are not looking to fix it. They are looking to talk about it and create a scandal everywhere they go.
Unfortunately, misspoke earlier when she said that the schoolgirl in question was acting out a fallacy. I think you meant a fantasy. But actually, she is acting out a fallacy.
Thanks ever
a
so
fallacy.
much. But do you know what I find fascinating?
She was right with fallacy.
Do you know what's fascinating about Douglas?
Which has been propagated. A fallacy which has been propagated by gender ideologues and is doing profound damage to gay people, among others, in our society, as well as women.
Like
and
you
let me
ever
explain
cared.
very quick. Let me
Ever cared.
explain very quickly why. I can't quite hear you, but I can hear you muttering something.
So, Douglas, it's really important, actually, all of that point that you've just brought up, it's very on brand for you because, you know, you like to stoke fear. You've actually made a career out of it. I'll take you back to your book, The Strange Death of Europe, and you made a big fright, you frightened the entire public about your thoughts on Europe, and we ended up in Brexit. You weren't the sole contributor to that, but you were a big
Can we
voice
stick
in
on to
that.
the...
Look how she is going to embarrass herself with that argument.
Very quickly, I don't know, Ava, anything about your career. I don't know if you have one. But you did try to imply that you knew something about mine, and you just showed you know nothing about it, because actually my 2017 bestseller, The Strange Death of Europe, was not about the EU. So you should learn at some point to read more than the title of the book before
Europe.
commenting upon it.
It was about migration.
This woman tries to destroy Douglas with arguments, but Douglas got a very good counter. Let's see.
Cancel people, destroy people for saying something that everyone thought until 24 hours ago. And we're making up and evolving a lot of our ethics and I'd say the metaphysics as we go along. And it's very confusing.
Let's come back to this interview for a moment.
Even the Pope respects people's pronouns now.
I don't have to respect anybody's pronouns.
Well, that's fine as long as that's your decision.
My pronoun is hottest man in the world.
Yeah, well, I'm happy to call you that.
Well, go on then.
Some may disagree, but
Go on
if that's what you are, then cool, I will address you as the hottest man in the world.
Throughout the entire interview?
Throughout the entire
Okay, come back to you. You don't have to call me the hottest man in the world, even if you're thinking it. Sam Smith. To me, he's just on an ever-deteriorating campaign to be as vulgar and offensive as he possibly can. Am I missing something?
He's doing what pop stars have done for decades, which is trying to shock as a means to get publicity. And of course, it's pretty successful. I mean, we're talking about him at the moment. But it's striking that it's sort of very unoriginal. I mean, all the stuff he's doing, the sort of over-sexualized stuff, the sort of satanic stuff. Madonna did this 40 years ago.
These people were talking like ChatGPT. They were just rolling out this answer. And as it happened, I actually asked the same questions that these leaders of major universities in America were asked. I asked the same question to ChatGPT, and ChatGPT got it right. Said actually calling for genocide is regarded as being unacceptable. So here's the interesting thing. We've got to such a state in our universities that the people who lead the universities in America are actually less moral than AI.
The fact that a non-sentimental machine has more morality than a human proves the world's current state and why they are trying to replace us.
White people worldwide have really reckoned with how much their own personal identity is shaped by constructions of whiteness.
Why should we judge Europeans for building a society? Why didn't Africans build a better one? We shouldn't blame Europe for that.
Yes, of course, the organization that he tried to set up at the University of Boston ended up being just a feast of corruption and much more. Who could have expected? Ibram X. Kendi, as people could probably tell from that clip, is not very bright. He tries to sort of construct ideas as he's through these piles of waffle. His books are pretty unreadable. I only read them because I'm paid to. The man is a walking philosophical and moral disaster. The interesting thing about Kendi, however, is not just that he demonizes a whole race of people, he just demonizes white people in a way that would be totally unacceptable and rightly unacceptable to do about any other race. But for some reason, people seem to think at the moment it's acceptable to do about white people. It's not just that he does that. The interesting thing, Rita, is you say, he puts himself forward for very well-paid corporate gigs. But you know one thing Ibram X. Kendi will not do? Is to debate his ideas. So I'm very happy to once again say publicly what I have said a couple of times before, which is I challenge Ibram X. Kendi to a debate anytime, anywhere, any place. I'm very happy to debate a motion of his choosing. I'm very happy for all the proceeds to go to a charity of our choice. And I'd like to see him show up. once, but he has never had his facile ideas debated, and so I suggest there's a reason for that. He knows they don't stand up to scrutiny. Fine. Once again, he can reveal that fact to the public.
Of course, he can't debate. His arguments are full of nonsense and are blaming white people for no reason.
It's startling that this is a woman who became president of perhaps the most elite university in America. And she published no books. She published 11 articles in her career. And it's turned out that much of them were just plagiarized, stolen from other people. So how did she even get there in the first place?
She has 50 allegations of plagiarism against her. Douglas, my grandmother would not trust Claudine Gay to herd her goats. This woman could not be the president of Harvard. I don't understand how this happened, and yet I do. And people like me, you know, Helen Placrose, James Lindsay. There were so many of us early on who saw this years and years ago and who kept on saying, this thing is rotten. It's not going to go away. We were told so many times, oh, it's universities, you know, radical ideas emerge in universities, but over time they disappear. No.
Let me give you another couple of reactions to her resignation this week. Ibram X. Kendi, the author of a book called How to Be an Anti-Racist, which I think's the wrong title for it. You should just take anti out. Ibram X. Kendi said that in the wake of Claudine Gay's resignation, racist mobs won't stop until they topple all black people from positions of power and influence. And Ida Bay Wells, Nicole Hannah-Jones, one of the authors of the 1619 Project for the New York Times, said after the resignation, academic freedom is under attack, racial justice programs are under attack, black women will be made to pay. I mean, there are still people clinging on to this, aren't there, Ayan? This sort of, somebody must be defended simply on the colour of their skin, and all the claims of plagiarism, which would get any student chucked out, and all the inability to condemn racism, which would normally lead to condemnation, all that sort of brushed to one side, because what really matters is just the colour of somebody's skin.